It was a typical Saturday morning when Jessica, a young black woman in her 20s, walked into the grocery store near her apartment. The air was filled with the familiar scent of fresh produce, and the sounds of shopping carts rolling and people chatting filled the aisles. She had a short list of items she needed for the week. Some vegetables, a loaf of bread, and a few snacks. It was the same store she had visited countless times before. The next few minutes felt like an eternity for Jessica as she made her way toward the checkout counter. Her thoughts were swirling in her mind, trying to make sense of what had just happened in the aisles. Was it her imagination, or had Mr. Clark truly treated her differently because of how she looked? She had been coming to this store for years, always respectful and polite. Why had he singled her out today? As she waited in line at the checkout, her mind raced with frustration. She tried to distract herself by looking at the food she had picked out: fresh fruits, bread, and a few snacks for the weekend, but it was hard to ignore the feeling of unease. The more she thought about it, the more she realized that it wasn't just a coincidence. Mr. Clark had been watching her. She had noticed the way his eyes lingered on her, the way he questioned her every move, almost as if he expected her to do something wrong. Jessica's grip on the handle of her shopping cart tightened as she thought about what had happened. She couldn't shake the sense that she had been humiliated. The way Mr. Clark had questioned her presence in the store, the way he had made her feel small, as though she wasn't welcome. She couldn't let it go. It wasn't just about the comments he made. It was about how he made her feel. Like she didn't belong. Finally, it was her turn to check out. The cashier greeted her with a smile, but Jessica could barely return it. She handed over her items, trying to keep her composure, but inside, she was boiling with anger and frustration. She wasn't the type to cause a scene, but she couldn't help feeling like something needed to be done. She shouldn't just let this slide. It wasn't right. As the cashier scanned her items, Jessica glanced over to see Mr. Clark standing at the customer service desk, chatting with another employee. His expression was casual, almost like nothing had happened. But Jessica couldn't shake the feeling that he hadn't just been rude. He had been deliberately dismissive and disrespectful. It wasn't just a bad day for him. It was something deeper. She paid for her groceries quickly, eager to leave, but she couldn't help feeling a sense of powerlessness. How many others had Mr. Clark treated this way? How many other customers had been humiliated by him and just walked away, not wanting to make a fuss? She realized that she couldn't just keep quiet. This wasn't just about her. This was about standing up for what was right. As she walked out of the store, Jessica took a deep breath, trying to shake off the feelings of anger and frustration. But the more she thought about it, the more she realized she couldn't just forget about what had happened. She had to do something, even if it meant confronting Mr. Clark or bringing it to the attention of the store management. She didn't know exactly what the right next step was, but she knew one thing for sure. She couldn't let the humiliation slide. She deserved to be treated with respect, just like everyone else. That evening, Jessica sat at her kitchen table, still feeling the weight of what had happened earlier that day. Her mind kept replaying the moments in the store, the way Mr. Clark had watched her so closely, the dismissive look on his face, and how he questioned her as though she wasn't allowed to be there. She felt a wave of frustration every time she thought about it, but there was something else nagging at her, something that made her hesitate before taking any action. She didn't want to cause trouble, didn't want to make a scene. But the more she thought about it, the more she realized that what had happened wasn't just rude. It was unfair. It wasn't just about her. It was about every person who had ever been made to feel like they didn't belong because of how they looked or where they came from. After a long pause, Jessica picked up her phone and dialed a number she had memorized since childhood. The phone rang a few times before someone answered on the other end. "Hey, it's Jessica," she said, her voice a bit tight. "I need to talk to you about something that happened today." Her father, Richard, picked up on the tension in her voice right away. "What happened, sweetheart?" he asked, his voice filled with concern. "Well, I went to the grocery store and I had a weird experience. The manager, Mr. Clark, treated me like I didn't belong there. He questioned what I was doing in the store, watched me like I was doing something wrong. I just didn't feel like I was welcome, and it really upset me." There was a pause on the other end of the line. Her father, a man who held a powerful position as the CEO of a successful company, had always taught her to stand up for herself, to be confident, but Jessica had never imagined she would be in a situation like this. Her father took a deep breath, his voice steady but concerned. "I'm really sorry that happened, Jessica. That's unacceptable. No one should make you feel like that. Do you want me to look into it? I can speak with the store about the manager's behavior." Jessica hesitated for a moment, unsure if she really wanted to bring her father into it. But then, thinking about how Mr. Clark had treated her, how wrong it felt, she made up her mind. "Yes, please," she said, her voice more confident now. "I think something needs to be done. I don't want anyone else to feel the way I did today." Her father agreed, and after their conversation, he promised he would get to the bottom of it. As they hung up, Jessica felt a strange sense of relief. She knew that her father's support would make a difference, but it wasn't just about his position or his influence. It was about doing the right thing. That night, Jessica tried to relax, but the anger and frustration still lingered. She knew she had done the right thing by speaking up. She wasn't sure what the outcome would be, but she had to trust that whatever happened next would bring some kind of change. Maybe it wouldn't fix everything, but it would be a start. The next morning, Jessica received a message from her father. He had already contacted the grocery store, and they had agreed to investigate the incident. She felt a mixture of relief and anticipation. She knew this wasn't over, but now, at least, someone was listening. The next day, Jessica tried to go about her routine, but her mind was still occupied with what had happened at the store. It wasn't easy to shake the feeling of being disrespected, and though she was grateful for her father's support, she couldn't help but feel a little anxious about what would happen next. She had never been in a situation like this before, and the thought of things escalating made her uneasy. At the same time, Jessica knew that her father was a man of action. Richard had always been someone who did what he said he would do, and when he told her he would handle the situation, she trusted him. Still, she couldn't help but wonder what would come of it. What if Mr. Clark denied everything? What if he just got away with it? Her thoughts were interrupted by a text from her father. "I've spoken to the store management, and they're looking into it." The message read, "I'll keep you updated." Jessica sighed in relief. It was comforting to know that her father was taking it seriously. She didn't want the incident to go unnoticed, but now it was out of her hands. She took a deep breath, trying to calm herself. For the first time since the incident, she allowed herself to relax a little. Later that afternoon, her father called her again. "I've gathered some information, and it looks like this isn't the first time Mr. Clark has acted this way," he said. "There have been a few complaints from customers in the past, but nothing too serious." "That changes today." Jessica was taken aback. "I'm not surprised," she said softly. "It didn't feel like an isolated incident. I couldn't help but wonder how many others he's treated that way." Her father agreed. "Exactly. And that's why I'm taking this seriously. It's not just about one bad experience. It's about setting a standard that this kind of behavior won't be tolerated." The conversation gave Jessica some hope. It was clear that her father wasn't just focused on fixing her situation. He was focused on addressing the bigger issue. She was proud of him for standing up for what was right, but at the same time, she couldn't help but feel a little guilty. She didn't want to see anyone lose their job, even if they were in the wrong. But she knew deep down that what Mr. Clark had done was unacceptable. Her father continued, "I'm planning to have a meeting with the regional manager, and we'll decide what the next steps are. I'll make sure the store's leadership knows that this kind of treatment won't be tolerated." Jessica nodded, feeling a little more confident now. "Thank you, Dad. I really appreciate everything you're doing. I just want to make sure this doesn't happen to anyone else." Her father's voice softened. "You did the right thing by speaking up. Don't forget that. And I'll make sure this gets handled properly." As the day wore on, Jessica felt a little less anxious. She knew her father was doing everything he could to resolve the situation, and she felt more empowered knowing that her voice was being heard. But there was still a lingering feeling in the back of her mind. Even though things seemed to be moving in the right direction, she couldn't shake the thought that there was so much more work to be done, not just with Mr. Clark, but in the world around her. She spent the rest of the evening reflecting on the situation, thinking about how important it was to speak up when something wasn't right. It wasn't always easy, but it was necessary. She knew that this moment, this small act of standing up for herself, was part of something bigger, and no matter what happened next, she had already made a difference. The next few days passed slowly for Jessica, though her mind never fully stopped racing. She kept thinking about the conversation with her father and what might happen next. She knew that her father was determined to take action, but she couldn't stop wondering about the outcome. Would the store actually do something? Would they fire Mr. Clark, or would they just brush it off as a misunderstanding? Her father had promised to keep her updated, and the waiting was starting to feel unbearable. As much as she appreciated his efforts, she couldn't help but feel a little restless. She thought about how long Mr. Clark had been getting away with his behavior, and it frustrated her. How many people had he treated like this, and how many others were still out there who might face the same treatment? One afternoon, as Jessica was going through some emails, her phone buzzed with a text from her father. She quickly picked it up, eager to hear the latest. "I spoke with the regional manager today," the text read. "They're taking this very seriously. They've already pulled Mr. Clark's records and found multiple complaints. He's been given a final warning, and they're putting him through retraining on customer service and company values." Jessica read the message a few times, feeling a strange mix of relief and concern. It wasn't the immediate firing she had expected, but it was clear that the company was taking steps to address the issue. Mr. Clark wasn't getting off without consequences, and that was something, at least. Her father had continued to explain in his text. "I've also made sure they know that this is a bigger issue than just one employee. The company is committed to better training and ensuring that all customers are treated equally. It's a step in the right direction." Jessica felt a small smile tug at her lips. She was glad her father had been so thorough, that he hadn't just let it slide. But she also knew that retraining, though necessary, wasn't a quick fix. It wouldn't erase what Mr. Clark had done or how it had made her feel. Later that evening, they spoke on the phone again. "How are you feeling?" her father asked, his voice gentle. "I know this has been a lot to handle." "I'm okay," Jessica replied, though her voice sounded a little unsure. "I just keep thinking about how many people this has probably happened to. I wish I could have done more, but I don't know what else I could have done." Her father reassured her. "You did the right thing, Jessica. Don't doubt yourself. It's not always easy to stand up for what's right, but you did, and that's what matters. You've made a difference already." Jessica smiled, grateful for his support. She had learned something in the past few days. Sometimes standing up for yourself wasn't just about confronting the person who wronged you. Sometimes it was about pushing for change in a system that needed it. Even if it didn't always happen overnight, even if it didn't always feel like enough, it was still progress. The conversation ended with Jessica feeling a little lighter, a little more at peace with the situation. She knew that things weren't perfect, but they were moving in the right direction. She had done her part, and now it was time to let things unfold. As the days passed, Jessica heard less about Mr. Clark. The store had quietly shifted its focus to improving its customer service and training procedures, and Jessica knew that the incident, though painful, had sparked something important. She hoped that others would never have to feel the way she had felt in the store again. And if they did, maybe they would speak up, just like she had. Things weren't perfect, but Jessica felt proud of what she had accomplished. She had stood up for herself, and in doing so, she had helped make her community a little better. And that, in the end, was all she could ask for. The days that followed were quieter for Jessica, but she found it hard to fully relax. While she was grateful for the steps her father had taken, a part of her still wondered if Mr. Clark had truly learned his lesson. Retraining was one thing, but she couldn't help but feel like a simple change in attitude wouldn't be enough to fix everything. What if he still looked at people the same way? What if he kept treating others the way he had treated her? Despite these lingering questions, she tried to push them to the back of her mind. She had done what she could, and now it was up to the store's management to follow through. Over the next week, life began to return to normal. Jessica went back to her usual routine, feeling a sense of peace she hadn't had before. She was still processing everything that had happened, but at least she knew she wasn't alone in facing it. One afternoon, she received a phone call from her father, and as soon as she saw his name on the screen, she picked it up quickly. She had been expecting a follow-up, but she didn't know exactly when it would come. "Hi, Dad," she greeted him. "Hey, sweetheart," her father's voice sounded warm. "I wanted to check in and let you know that I had another meeting with the regional manager today. They'd done some follow-up with Mr. Clark after his retraining, and I have to say, the change in his attitude is noticeable." Jessica was quiet for a moment, not sure what to feel. She had hoped for some change, but hearing it directly from her father made it feel more real. "I'm glad to hear that," she finally said, feeling a little lighter. "Do you think he really understands what he did?" "I believe so," her father responded. "The company is committed to making sure all employees understand the importance of respectful treatment, and it looks like they're doing a better job of enforcing that. Mr. Clark has been more mindful around other customers, according to the reports. They're monitoring his behavior closely, and they've warned him that any further incidents will not be tolerated." Jessica felt a small sense of relief. It wasn't perfect, and it didn't undo what had happened, but it was a step forward. It was reassuring to know that her father's efforts were paying off, and that Mr. Clark's actions wouldn't just be swept under the rug. But there was still something lingering in Jessica's mind. What would happen if the next person wasn't as lucky? What if the store didn't take action for them? "Thanks for handling all of this, Dad," she said, her voice softer now. "I really appreciate it. I just keep thinking about how many people go through this kind of thing and don't have someone to speak up for them." Her father was quiet for a moment, and then he spoke with the kind of wisdom that Jessica had always respected. "You're right, Jessica. Not everyone has the same opportunity to be heard. But what you did, what we did, is a reminder that we can all make a difference. It might be small, but it matters." Jessica smiled, feeling a little better. It was easy to feel powerless when you encountered a problem that seemed bigger than yourself, but hearing her father's words gave her a sense of purpose. Maybe the change wasn't immediate, but it was happening. And if it could happen with Mr. Clark, maybe it could happen elsewhere too. As the conversation ended, Jessica sat back in her chair, reflecting on everything that had happened over the past few weeks. The path had been uncomfortable, but it had brought her a new understanding of the power of speaking up. She didn't have to stay quiet or just accept the unfairness she encountered. She could make her voice heard. The situation wasn't over, but it had taken a turn for the better. Jessica knew that there would be more challenges ahead, more moments where she would need to stand up for what was right. But for now, she could rest easy knowing that her actions had made a difference. That feeling, that sense of having done something meaningful, stayed with her long after the phone call ended. It was a reminder that, no matter how small, every action mattered. A few weeks had passed since Jessica had spoken up at the grocery store, and things had slowly started to return to normal. She still shopped at the same store, but now there was a slight shift in her perspective. While the incident with Mr. Clark had made her feel uncomfortable and vulnerable, it had also helped her realize something important. She had the ability to stand up for herself and create change. Her father had kept her informed about the progress in the store's training, and Jessica couldn't help but feel proud of how far things had come. Mr. Clark had undergone retraining, and the company had promised to take stronger actions in ensuring that every customer was treated equally. Jessica had expected things to improve for the people who came after her, but part of her still wondered if there was more that could be done. One afternoon, Jessica decided to visit the store again. It had been a while since she'd walked through those aisles, and although she was still a bit wary, she knew she needed to move on. She told herself that it would be different now. There was no reason to keep dwelling on the past. As she entered the store, she took a deep breath, scanning the aisles for anything that might trigger those old feelings. She wandered through the aisles, picking out the things she needed, but the store felt different this time. The atmosphere was calm, peaceful even, as though there was a renewed sense of respect between the customers and staff. She noticed that the employees were smiling and engaging with everyone, including her. It was a small change, but it felt significant. The feeling of being watched, the coldness she had felt before, seemed to have faded away. As Jessica made her way toward the checkout counter, she couldn't help but feel a sense of pride. It wasn't just about Mr. Clark anymore. It was about the store as a whole. The shift in the staff's attitude felt like a reflection of something bigger. Change was possible, even if it took time. It was a reminder that standing up for what was right wasn't just about winning a battle. It was about planting the seeds for a larger transformation. When she reached the counter, the cashier greeted her with a friendly smile. "How are you today?" he asked. His tone was warm and welcoming, and for a moment, Jessica couldn't help but feel grateful. "I'm doing well, thank you," she replied, smiling back. "It's nice to see the store so busy." The cashier nodded. "Yeah, it's been great. Everyone's been really nice lately. We've had some new training, and it's been a good change. It's nice to feel like we're all working together." Jessica's heart lifted as she paid for her groceries. It wasn't just the retraining of one manager. It was a collective effort, a shift in the way people treated each other. It wasn't perfect, but it was progress. And in that moment, Jessica knew that her decision to speak up had been the right one. Her actions had helped contribute to this change, no matter how small. As she walked out of the store, carrying her groceries, she felt a sense of closure. She had faced an uncomfortable situation, but she had turned it into something positive. The feeling of empowerment that came from standing up for herself had changed her, and she knew she would never be the same. There would always be challenges ahead, but she was no longer afraid to face them head-on. Walking back to her apartment, Jessica felt more connected to her community than ever before. She knew that real change took time, and that it wasn't always easy, but she also knew that even the smallest actions could have a lasting impact. She had made a difference, and that was something she could be proud of. The experience had taught her something valuable, that standing up for herself was not just a personal victory, but a victory for everyone who deserved to be treated with respect. As the days passed, Jessica continued to reflect on what had happened. She realized that while the store had made improvements, there was still much work to be done in the world. But she also knew that by speaking out, by using her voice, she had contributed to something better. And that, in itself, was enough. As the weeks went by, Jessica found herself carrying a quiet sense of pride with her wherever she went. The experience at the grocery store had changed her in ways she hadn't fully expected. When the situation first unfolded, she had been filled with frustration and uncertainty. She had felt small, embarrassed, and unsure of what to do next. But now, looking back, she saw how much strength she had discovered in herself. It wasn't just about the immediate aftermath of the incident. It was about the change she had sparked by speaking up. One evening, as Jessica sat down for a quiet dinner at home, her phone buzzed with a message from her father. He had always been her biggest supporter, and his texts often came with words of encouragement. This time, the message was brief but filled with meaning. "The regional manager sent me a thank you note today. They said that your actions not only helped the store, but also sparked a larger conversation within the company about diversity and customer treatment." Reading the message brought a smile to Jessica's face. She had never imagined that a single moment of standing up for herself could ripple out in such a powerful way. It wasn't just Mr. Clark who had learned something. It was the whole company. The conversation about customer service had expanded beyond one person's behavior, creating room for positive change. And while the acknowledgement from her father felt nice, it wasn't what truly mattered to Jessica. What mattered was that things were improving for everyone. Her father had always told her that it was the little things that made a difference, how a single act of kindness could brighten someone's day, or how standing up for what was right could shift a larger perspective. Jessica had never fully understood that until now. She had never imagined that by confronting a rude manager, she would set off a chain of events that would lead to more respect, better training, and, ultimately, a stronger sense of community. The changes in the store were subtle at first. The employees' smiles became more genuine. The tone of their voices softened. Even Mr. Clark, after going through his retraining, seemed to have a different attitude. He was no longer the cold, distant manager Jessica had encountered that day. He was more approachable, more aware of how his words and actions impacted those around him. For Jessica, this transformation was a reminder of something important. Change wasn't always immediate, but it could be lasting. She had taken the first step, and now it was a matter of watching things unfold. There was still work to be done in the world, and there were still injustices that needed to be addressed. But she knew that she didn't have to stay silent. Her voice had power, and if she kept using it for good, she could make a difference. One afternoon, as Jessica was walking through the grocery store once again, she couldn't help but notice the difference. The atmosphere felt lighter, and as she walked past the shelves, she saw people of all backgrounds shopping without hesitation. There were no more cold stares, no more uncomfortable silences. There was a feeling of inclusivity that had been missing before. And in that moment, Jessica felt a sense of accomplishment. She had been a part of something bigger than herself, a movement, however small, toward a more respectful and understanding world. The manager's behavior had been addressed, but more than that, the company had taken steps to ensure that everyone was treated fairly. The ripple effect of her actions had expanded beyond just that one moment, and Jessica could see that the change was real. She felt proud of what had been accomplished, not just for her own sake, but for everyone who might walk into that store feeling the same way she once had. As Jessica left the store that day, carrying her groceries with a newfound sense of peace, she reflected on everything she had learned. Standing up for herself had been challenging, but it had taught her the importance of using her voice when something wasn't right. She had made a difference, and now, with a smile on her face and hope in her heart, she knew that things were changing for the better.